Hey Stark, how are you this morning?
Hey Parker, I'm doing just fine. How are you?
Fantastic. Say, I wanted to ask you something. So I recently decided I wanted a tutor. I thought I could really help others with their classes and be an educational superhero, so to speak. Anyway, I was wondering if you could possibly help me out.
Sure. I've only known you for a short while, but you do seem like you have a lot of potential. Why don't you go ahead and follow me up to my office in Stark Tower and I can maybe give you a few tips.
Really? Yeah, that would be great. I've always wanted to see the top floor of Stark Tower. This is so exciting.
Yes, it is. Very exciting. Alright, Peter Parker. Before we make our way up to the top of Stark Tower, let's discuss a bit about what it means to be a tutor. I know this may seem obvious to you, but there's actually a lot that goes into being a tutor.
Absolutely, I completely understand. So, just out of curiosity, what would you say that a tutor is?
Well, here's how I would put it. A tutor is someone who engages in a peer teaching and learning relationship with their students within a structured and supervised educational context. In other words, a tutor is someone who works with students to help them succeed academically by providing them with plenty of resources and skills that would help them do well in their classes.
That makes sense, but how is that any different from what a teacher does? Is there really any difference between being a tutor and being a professor?
Actually, I'm really glad you asked that. There definitely are similarities, however the key difference is that tutoring is more of a peer-to-peer learning relationship with one or more people. A professor teaches a class full of students, whereas a tutor helps individual students who may be seeking assistance in their class. Another difference is that tutors work on a more personal level to try and get students not only to learn the material, but also to help them acquire the skills and tools to effectively learn the material on their own. Also, professors are experts in their field, and tutors are not. Tutors are supposed to be very knowledgeable in their subject area they are tutoring for, however, they are not expected to be experts.
Okay, wow, light bulb. That makes a lot more sense.
Great, let's go inside. Alright, so something you may want to consider is the manner in which you may address a student from a tutoring perspective. So let's try to consider a situation that you could potentially find yourself in.
Alright, I'm listening.
Let's say that Charles Xavier is a tutor and has been tutoring his student Raven Darkholm for about an hour a day for the last 5 weeks in Intro to Psychology. Now, one day at the beginning of their meeting, Raven arrives late and looks very shaken. Her eyes dart about nervously and she appears to be very jittery. Charles, of course, has never seen her this startled before and begins expressing concern. A few minutes into the session, Raven starts complaining about how her shrink has changed her medication and says she stopped taking it and that she's having trouble feeling good at the moment. Raven continues to describe the situation in more depth, but her narrative is very fragmented and the more she talks, the more she becomes agitated. Charles realizes that their tutoring time is ticking away and that the medication she was referring to may be related to psychological treatment. What would you do in this situation if you were Charles Xavier? Do you think it would be an appropriate time to continue the tutoring session?
I would safely assume that Raven may not be mentally stable in that moment and that it probably isn't the best time for her to be having this session. I personally would try to reschedule another time, maybe direct her to services on campus that might be able to help her. I think this would be much more beneficial than trying to proceed with the session.
Perfect. That's actually a really great answer. I couldn't have said it better myself. Just keep in mind that situations like this may actually exist, and as a tutor you'll want to behave responsibly. Let's go ahead and hop on the elevator. Alright, so there are 6 main goals that I want my tutors to focus on that I believe will help you develop the best practices for being a tutor. The first goal is to promote independent learning with your student. This is very important because we want students to acquire the skill set to learn independently without your help. You don't want to just explain everything to the student and give them all the answers because in doing so, they are never actually learning how to learn, which means they will always be reliant on you to do their work for them. We really want students to develop independent learning strategies so that they can continue to be successful in all of their courses, not just the one that you're tutoring in.
That's a really good point. I actually always thought that tutoring was just a process of teaching material to the students.
Exactly, and that's why I really want to stress that this is not what tutors should be doing.
Okay, I'll definitely remember that.
The second goal is to personalize the tutoring session when you are working with a student. You should understand that every student learns in different ways. We are all wired differently based on our genetics and most importantly based on our experiences, especially earlier in life. By the time a student reaches you and seeks for your help, they will be wired a very specific way based on their experiences from birth to present. So some students may be more visual learners, others may be more auditory learners or hands-on learners. Some students may study better in quiet environments and others may study with background music. The point I'm trying to make is keep in mind that every student is unique and your sessions should be planned and personalized based on what works best for them.
I guess I never really thought of things that way. People are very unique in so many ways. I'll have to keep that in mind.
Perfect. So the third goal is to implement multiple perspectives and insights when your student is trying to learn the material. Your objective as a tutor should be to look at the content from multiple angles. Try to see how the student conceptualizes the information, observe their methods of learning, and then share new perspectives with them on how to approach learning the material. As a tutor, you're good at approaching and studying new material. Share this wisdom with your students, but most importantly, facilitate the students' insight into the learning process. And remember, the goal of the tutor is to provide opportunities and support students as they search for answers.
Definitely, that makes a lot of sense. Oh, we're stopping. I don't believe this is the right floor. Someone must be getting on the elevator.
Well, hello, Natasha. Parker, I'd like to introduce you to Natasha Romanoff. Natasha, this is Peter Parker. Natasha is a close colleague of mine.
Nice to meet you, Peter.
Likewise.
We were just talking about the 6 goals of tutoring. We actually just discussed the first 3 just now.
Oh, yes. Do you mind if I explain the other 3?
Not at all. Go right ahead.
All right. Well, the 4th goal is to provide your perspective on learning and school success through the lens of being a student yourself. A part of being a tutor is establishing a peer-to-peer relationship. Remember that you have experience in the class. You've likely just recently taken the course and you have a lot of knowledge on how the class is structured. Relay this to your students. You know how the professor teaches the course. You know what they may be looking for on an exam. You know what is expected on class assignments. Keep that in mind.
Also keep in mind that if you haven't taken the course recently, you can always ask the professor if anything has changed, or you can also talk to other tutors and mentors to gain more knowledge for your own sessions.
Very good point. The 5th goal is to respect individual differences. There are a lot of different people at IUPUI with a lot of diverse backgrounds, ideas, opinions, and motivations. It is important that you have respect for everyone, no matter who they are, and be mindful that many students will likely be very different than you. And it should go both ways. The student should also respect who you are as an individual as well. If for whatever reason a confrontation were to arise and the student disrespects you, be sure to inform your supervisor or program coordinator and they will assist you.
Absolutely. Respecting people for who they are is very important to me. I'll definitely make an effort to treat my students with respect based on their individual differences.
That's great. I like to hear that. The 6th goal is to make sure that you are staying within your realm of tutoring. Stick to the job description. Remember that you're not a counselor, you're not a psychiatrist, and you're not the professor. You are a tutor. Know your limits. For example, if a student is having trouble with personal problems, it's not your job to help them with that. Refer the student to other resources offered on campus when they need help with something outside of your job description.
Okay, so does that mean I should be familiar with all the resources on campus?
You don't have to have all resources memorized, but you should make an effort to know them, or help the student find those resources by doing a simple web search if you don't know.
Okay, that's actually very helpful. I wouldn't have thought to do that.
Great, so definitely try to keep these goals in mind. They will help you stay on track as a tutor. Well, it looks like this is our stop. Let's go ahead and get off now. Welcome to the top of Stark Tower. You can actually look outside and see IUPUI from here.
This is way too cool. IUPUI looks amazing from this view.
These are 2 more colleagues of mine, Wanda Maximoff and Bruce Banner. They, along with Natasha, are going to help you train to become a tutor.
Nice to meet you both.
It's good to meet you, Peter.
Alright, so we already discussed the 6 goals of tutoring on the long elevator ride up here, and we also already discussed what it means to be a tutor. So now we need to talk about something that we refer to as the tutoring cycle. Wanda, would you care to begin?
The tutor cycle is designed to help you organize your tutoring session and keep you on track. It's a 12-step process that should really help you plan for your session and keep things running smoothly. 12 steps is a lot to remember, so you don't necessarily have to memorize each step, but you should be familiar with them and be able to implement them in order during your session. I think you will actually find it to be quite helpful. The first step is to greet your student. Make them feel comfortable coming to your session. Students often feel intimidated when they first meet with their tutor because they are struggling in the course and may feel reluctant to ask for help. The fact that they are there shows that they have made their first step to doing well in their course. Make them feel comfortable and be friendly and open-minded. The second step is to identify the task that you are going to be working with. Ask the student why they came in and what they want help with. Once you know what they're struggling with, you can better assess how your session will play out. For the third step, break the task down into different parts. You want the student to gain independence, so let them take the lead in breaking the task into different parts based on what they are struggling with. If they aren't entirely sure how to break down the task, then help them by asking critical questions that get the student to think about how to break up the session into different parts.
The fourth step is to identify the thought process. Discuss with your student the specific kinds of work you will have to do to solve the problems you've been presented with. For example, does the student need to identify something, solidify information to their memory, organize or prove an argument for an assignment? This brief discussion is a way to teach the student how to learn and solve problems for him or herself. Use specific terms to help steer you and the student in the right direction as you address the task at hand. The fifth step is to set an agenda. Once you have divided the task into parts and discussed the specific kinds of mental work you and your student will do during the session, order those tasks in a logical fashion. Create a well-organized plan to make good use of your time. It may be wise to ask the student to write down the agenda for the session to keep you both on task. The sixth step is to finally address the task you've determined at the beginning of the session. This involves tackling the task head-on with a student and being prepared for anything. This is where most of your time will be spent, and this is the part of tutoring that most people think of when they think of traditional tutoring. Take this time to engage the student in meaningful dialogue, either about the question he or she has brought to the meeting or about issues you notice as you begin to assess the student's work. Effective tutoring always involves a back and forth exchange of information. The tutor should explain concepts to the student but should remain quiet at other times and to allow the student to explain his or her understanding. Both should ask questions and utilize books and other resources. And don't forget that the most important part of this step is to encourage independent thinking.
Okay, quick question. This all makes a lot of sense, but I'm still a bit confused on how much time I should spend on the sixth step. It almost seems like this would be what most of the tutoring session is all about.
Well, that's actually correct. This step of the process really should consume more time than any other step. In fact, you may even spend more time here than in all the other steps combined, which is completely fine. Just make sure to plan accordingly so you can do your best to make room for all the other steps as well.
The seventh step of the tutoring cycle is for the student to summarize the content that you have reviewed. Try to have them summarize what they understand and what they have learned during the session so far. Try asking open-ended questions if he or she has left out information or still seems confused about any important points. Step 8 is for the student to summarize any underlying processes that may have been used during the session. You want to try and get your student to internalize the basic processes that were used to address the problems that the student had during the session. Let the student reflect and allow them to explain what tools they learned to use and the usefulness of those tools. You really want to make sure the student understands these processes so that they can use them outside of your tutoring session as well as independently. The ninth step is the confirmation stage. Make sure to take time to wind down from the work of the session. Summarize what you have done and ask if the student has any more questions. As a tutor, you will want to determine whether or not the student has a good understanding of all the concepts you went over during the session. Provide positive reinforcement and critique the student's work while providing valuable insight.
The 10th step is figuring out what's next. Help the student determine what his or her next step will be after they leave the meeting. Ask the student if they think they will be coming back for another session or whether they should schedule another meeting. The student should ultimately determine whether or not they would like to meet again. However, you should use your insight as a student to assist the student in their decision. The 11th step is to actually arrange and plan the next session if there will be one. Let the student see you write down in your personal calendar the date, time, and location of your next meeting. This will give them the cue to do the same and give you the opportunity to suggest that they make a note of the meeting if you realize they have not. You and your student should also set a tentative goal for the student to complete by the next meeting. The final step is to end the session on a good note. Let the student know why the meeting has gone well, and if they have not reached your goal for that meeting, explain why. You may also want to explain what the student can do to be more prepared next time. Most importantly, end the meeting on a positive note. You want your student to build confidence about coming to your session and feel welcome to return.
Wow, so that seems like a lot of steps. I feel like I'll have difficulties remembering them all.
That is absolutely fine. After you get used to tutoring for a while, these steps will feel very natural. In fact, you probably will forget what these steps are because you'll get so used to doing them naturally. As you begin as a new tutor though, it can be a bit intimidating, and we totally get that. What I would advise is to have these 12 steps printed out or accessible for you during the session to help keep you on track. You should also prepare a plan before the session even starts, and we would advise that you use the tutoring cycle to help you plan the session beforehand. You will find that this helps out a lot and makes the session run much more smoothly.
That's great advice. I'll definitely be doing that. That will help me out so much.
That's great. Okay, so we still have more to go over. Let's move to the training room to go over communication during the tutoring session. Wanda and Bruce, you can come with me. Right this way.
Good afternoon, Tony Stark.
Hello, Kamala Khan. Would you mind buzzing us in, please?
Not a problem. You are good to go.
Thank you, Kamala. You are the best, and don't you forget it. Alright, now we need to discuss communication during your session. Proper communication with your students will be very important. Being able to talk with your students and interact with them in an effective way will be crucial to running a successful tutoring session. There are 6 communicatory options we will need to discuss: initiate, reply, evaluate, explain, active listening, and quiet. We will elaborate each of these in detail for you.
The first communicatory option is to initiate. You are the tutor and are expected to lead the session. This means that you will need to initiate productive and effective conversation that allows the student to think about the material, or simply to just actively get involved in the conversation, whether it's related to the material or not. Initiating a good conversation usually involves asking a question that challenges the student to respond in a meaningful way. This brings us to the second communicatory option, reply, which is the interactive response that should be simulated by an effective and strategic question that you have initiated. The response will lead the conversation forward. The third option is to evaluate. After the student has had a chance to respond, you will have a chance to evaluate what they are saying. The student's response can really help you determine where a student is with the material, or may reveal to you how social or interactive the student is going to be. There are many different cues that you can get from a student's response that may help you determine how to proceed with the session. Then there is explanation, which allows for the student or you as the tutor to further elaborate, illustrate, summarize, or justify reasoning. Explanation by the student can illustrate gaps or missing information, while explanation by this tutor can provide background information or provide missing pieces of information to the student. Fifth, you should always engage in active listening. Active listening requires that you as the tutor fully concentrate, pay attention to, understand, respond, and remember what is being said by the student. It is really important that the student knows that you are actively listening. You can do this by nodding your head, keeping eye contact with the student without staring blankly, using a variety of words to let them know you are paying attention, and being sure not to get distracted while the student is talking to you. You don't want the student to think that they are wasting your time or feel like they are in an uncomfortable environment. Also, put your phone away so the student has your undivided attention. The sixth option is remaining quiet at specific points during the session. Sometimes the session will become quiet as the student begins to internalize and process the information they have just learned. It may seem difficult not to say something at this time to break the silence. However, if you do, then you are interrupting their thought process and may prevent them from fully understanding the material. Be sure to allow moments of silence to allow the student to think or formulate a response or explanation.
There are a few different models that utilize some of these communicatory topics. First, there is the IRP model. IRP stands for Initiate Reply Pattern. This model utilizes the initiate and reply communicatory options and is meant to provoke back and forth conversation between the student and the tutor. There is also the explain active listening pattern, where one person explains something in depth while the other actively listens. A lot of the time, tutors think that they should be the ones explaining. However, that is not always the case. It is actually recommended that you let the student do more of the explaining while you engage in active listening. Having the student explain the material will greatly help them understand the content, and having someone actively listen and provide feedback to them is an excellent value. You will realize that as a tutor, you are more likely to learn a lot more about the subject than you already knew.
Communication is very important, so do you feel that you have a good grasp of how to communicate during the session?
Yeah, I believe so. I didn't realize we were supposed to encourage the student to do a lot of the talking while the tutor actively listens, but it makes a lot of sense now.
Good. Yeah, that's actually a very crucial point that we want our tutors to take away. Now, there is one other part that really needs to be considered during communication with your students. That part is considering the intercultural framework with the different students you will be working with. IUPUI is a diverse campus, and it is important that you have an appreciation and respect for everyone that requests your tutoring help. There are 8 things we want you to keep in mind when you're tutoring that will help you create the best experience for yourself and your students.
The first thing is commitment. Be an active listener and show the student that you are committed and dedicated to helping them succeed. Show them that you really want to help them and that you are not just there to get paid. This also means you shouldn't be texting during the tutor session or doing other things that show you are uninterested. Show them that you are involved in the session. The second thing is acceptance. It is imperative that you accept your students for who they are no matter what. Your students will all be different in a variety of ways, and you should be respectful of those differences. You should also feel accepted by your student as well, since you are accepting of them. As was mentioned previously, if this were to become a problem and your student is acting in a disrespectful manner, you need to contact your supervisor or program coordinator to get things settled out. Empathy is third. It is important to make sure that you make an effort to understand your student and empathize with them. You want your student to feel comfortable and relaxed. Remember that you are likely a student, or you were a student at one time, so you know what they're going through. Use your experiences to relate with the student and let them know that you understand the struggle of the course as well. It will really be beneficial to let them know that they are not the only ones who have ever struggled before. In some cases, students may have circumstances that you cannot relate to. Acknowledge their challenges and help as much as you can within the realm of being a tutor. The fourth is filtered perception. We have all had different experiences in our lives that shape the way we perceive different situations. We have different cultural backgrounds and different interactions with different people and different life experiences. This creates a perception in our mind that alters how we expect things to play out in our day-to-day lives and how we expect people to act in those times. It is very important that you filter those perceptions and don't allow them to impede on the tutoring session, hence the term filtered perception. Failure to filter our perceptions may lead to stereotyping others because of an implicit perception that you may hold, and that could potentially get in the way of effectively tutoring that student. You should work very hard not to stereotype under any circumstances. This is unacceptable.
The fifth concept is us versus them. You should be cautious of your language. Categorizing a particular group of people by using us, them, they, we, or anything of the like can really be offensive. This type of language, when used to categorize people based on their differences, can create serious divisions among people, whether it be related to cultural situations, religious beliefs, race, gender, or anything along those lines. The sixth thing is discrimination institutionalized. As we stated before, IUPUI is arguably considered a diverse institution, and not every student here believes that this school embraces cultural awareness or equality on account of all students. It is important to know that when you are working with a student, there might be a difference of opinion in that regard, so keep that in mind. You should also take care to generalize cautiously. Do not, under any circumstances, stereotype, because even doing so on accident can really hurt your relation with your student. Any form of stereotyping is going to inhibit the student from learning independently, and that is the opposite of what you are trying to accomplish during your session. And finally, as a tutor, you need to solicit, accept, and reflect on feedback. Discuss with other mentors or tutors that you are tutoring and see what works for them. Share ideas and discuss what had worked effectively in the past. Collaborate and leave each other feedback. Tutoring is a learning process, and you will only ever get better at it if you continue to try and learn from others on what works best. When providing feedback among peers, it is important that you maintain confidentiality. This means not sharing with friends or colleagues about who you are tutoring or what concepts the student is receiving tutoring for. This also means not sharing any identifiable information about the student you are working with. Failure to maintain confidentiality can ruin the tutor relationship and potentially result in legal action.
Wow, this has been incredibly beneficial. I feel like I've learned so much.
That's wonderful. We really want to make sure that our tutors are well prepared to be the best tutors this world has ever seen. It is my hopes and dreams that we have helped train you to become the tutoring superhero you have always wanted to become. Now go out there and tutor away.
Thank you so much, but there's one thing. I kinda already am a superhero. You may have heard me on the news, which reminds me, I gotta go. With great power comes great responsibility.
Well, that's interesting. I did not see that coming. We should probably consider adding him to our team of Avengers.